Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Monday. We are heading for the election. This week has come that we political people spend weeks preparing for, and here it is.
You got some sun to prepare.
Yes, I took
I
took the last week off. I was in Miami for a little bit of vacation and some networking, actually with friends of the show. I caught up with some of our prominent guests, one of them who's going to be on today, Michael Shellenberger. We got to spend some time together in Miami. It was very nice.
Is that what we're going to ask him about? Is like what were you doing on the beach? What were you drinking? What were you drinking? That's what I want to know.
A lot of red wine. Myself, a lot of red wine, a lot of tequila, some mojitos.
Just like right now.
Kind of thing. Just like right now.
That's
this
how
is
we
coffee.
get through. That's how we get. Well, for you, it's coffee.
Yeah. By
Speak for yourself,
by
Robby.
Tuesday night, when we still don't know who has won, we might be switching from coffee to liquor. I think.
Champagne, maybe.
Champagne.
Prosecco, because we're cheap.
Real pain for my sham friends, champagne for my real friends, as Fall Out Boy said. All right, let's get to it. We're down to the wire. Obviously, the 2024 presidential election and the race is a nail-biter. It's as close can be. This past weekend, Harris fans, however, did get a boost when the Selzer poll carried out for the Des Moines Register newspaper shows Vice President Harris ahead substantially of her Republican rival, 3 points in that state. Iowa is a red state, is not expected to be competitive. There's been zero ad dollars spent there. So even Selzer was surprised that, according to her methodology, she showed that state actually in the Kamala Harris column. Here's what she said.
I don't think anybody would look at the numbers and not be, in a somewhat state of shock. We started interviewing Monday night, so Tuesday morning I walked in, my assistant was already crunching numbers, and she said, "Did you see the unweighted data?" I go, "Yeah, I'd like to see the weighted data." Yeah. So we're always very cautious about embracing things too much. I'm always telling my clients, don't get married to these numbers because they can change. But all they did was confirm what we were seeing in the unweighted data after Monday night, that Harris was in the lead in Iowa. And that was, nobody in their right mind would predict it.
Now, it's significant that Ann Selzer polling has gone against conventional wisdom in the past and has been proven to be correct. It was her poll that predicted Barack Obama would beat the powerful Hillary Clinton. Selzer has generated respect from both sides of the aisle, but former President Trump is not concerned about the poll. Here's what he told a Pennsylvania rally on Sunday.
You really do inflict damage, when you do like this person from Iowa. Today, the election essentially is really, we're talking Turkey, comes out with a poll different from every other poll because it wasn't even in question. It's really the opposite way. I'm way up. If you look at 3-4 months ago, Dan, I was losing states that now are walks, they're now walks. And I think you could have that here. It's called suppression. They suppress. And it actually should be illegal because it's, in many ways, it's worse than the written word, which these guys do quite well.
Trump backers also expressed confidence. Charlie Kirk tweeted, "Ignore the polls, ignore the pundits, ignore those that say Kamala has seized the momentum, just vote."
Ignore everyone but him. On this Monday morning, most other polls are still deadlocked, and the race is effectively a coin toss. Predictably, people are already playing Monday morning quarterback as to why each side could lose. It just may be the year of the woman, though. If Trump loses, many analysts say it will be women who turned out to vote against the limitations on reproductive rights. Women are finally standing up and voting their conscience, even if it means not telling their husbands, apparently. A controversial Julia Roberts ad that suggested women could ignore their husbands' wishes and lie to them about who they are voting for attracted attention over the weekend. Let's watch.
Your turn, honey.
In the one place in America where women still have a right to choose, you can vote any way you want, and no one will ever know.
Did you make the right choice?
Sure did, honey.
Remember, what happens in the booth stays in the booth. Vote Harris Walls.
That's a yikes for me. Turnout is heavy in early voting across the nation. The economy may be the issue that wins it for Trump. Nate Silver's latest analysis points out that high inflation is closely correlated with stronger support for Trump. He tweeted, perhaps not the biggest takeaway, but there is a notably high correlation between where inflation has been greater or lesser and where Harris has gained or lost ground versus Biden. Okay, lot to get into here. Let's start with the Selzer poll that was providing a lot of hope, I could tell, to left Democratic commentators. I turned on cable news yesterday to catch myself up, having been on vacation, and it was all like, praise the Lord, hallelujah, Ann Selzer has come to tell us things are not that bad, because Trump, I think, is very unlikely to actually lose Iowa, but Iowa correlates with Wisconsin, some other states. So if there's something that has been missed, because so far the polls have been so cautiously showing a deadlock between Trump and Harris in the 7 swing states, and there are some pro-Kamala people say, well, that's because pollsters are so afraid of getting it wrong because they massively underestimated Trump last time. It's funny that everybody thinks of 2016 as the election that the pollsters got wrong, but actually the polls were very close. 2020 was the election they got wrong. Even though they were correct that Joe Biden was going to win, they had him up by 6, and he won by 1 in Pennsylvania and the other swing states. So they're afraid of doing that again, and they are filtering out polls that show Kamala doing well to produce this. But actually, if you want an average, you want to include the ones that show her doing really well, the ones that show Trump doing really well, and the ones everywhere in between. And the theory of Democratic people is that these type of polls are out there, they're just not being included, and that's why you're seeing this close race. So maybe she's doing better than it seems.
And I think you would get that feeling based on vibes. And I know we make fun of vibes, but vibes do sort of play out in these races. I mean, you think about Barack Obama, he had the vibes. Donald Trump had the vibes in 2016. Yeah. I think 2020 is an anomaly because it was a COVID year and there was so many mail-in. It was, and that's part of the modeling issues that they're facing right now. Is a lot of it is based on either 2016 or the midterms, which are very different than presidential years, as we know, in terms of turnout. I think what's really interesting about this poll in particular is I don't think it's just about reproductive rights, which very, very important, and it doesn't mean that voters are single-issue voters and women are single-issue voters. I think it's the symbolism of what reproductive rights represents in terms of how far Trump administration would be willing to go given what they've already done and what they're planning to do and what Project 2025 says. But simultaneously, in Iowa, it seems like farmers are a little upset too. There's a lot of conversation online about folks being interviewed, farmers being interviewed, upset about the tariff policies because it does impact them. And these are economic decisions that are. It might work when Donald Trump talks about putting the burden on other countries, but they have real world implications, and it's not like small business owners and farmers aren't aware of this. So it's interesting to see how that might trickle down. Also, just with older voters, and this is happening across the board, it's not just in Iowa, Kamala Harris is doing extremely well, the best any Democrat has done since 2000. And she's winning with male older voters over the age of 65. On average, 50 to 80 plus, voters are R plus 13. That's Republican plus 13. And it gets more extreme as they get older and older. And so she's showing some signs of momentum with the most likely and reliable voters who I don't think they're just voting on reproductive rights, although I do think women care about that. I think it's about democracy, stability.
I mean, perhaps showing momentum. I think this race is actually just as close as it appears to be. She's up slightly in Michigan and Wisconsin, down by like 0.3 in Pennsylvania. If everything goes if the polls are dead on right now, actually Trump is she's going to win the swing states except for Pennsylvania, and it's going to be a Trump presidency. But it's 0.3 is so within this margin of error, we don't know. But again, I just go back to last time where it showed Biden up by 6. Yeah. They were off by 5-something points in Democrats' favor. If anything like that occurs again, this is going to be a decisive Trump victory. Or if there's something they're missing and Iowa is indicative, it could be a decisive Kamala victory or something in between. Or we'll find out that these states are not correlated. Right. That she's holding on to the Midwestern blue wall states, but she's losing Latinos and some minority voters, and she's going to get killed in the Sun Belt states, Georgia, North Carolina, who knows? So we could see that these all don't correlate, and different voters are making different minds about these candidates. As we see women more enthusiastic about the Democratic nominee, men more enthusiastic about the Republican nominee, that difference coming along, of course, coming out in that ad.
Men under 50.
Coming out in that ad, though, which I don't, that ad, I mean,
But you're not the target audience.
well, right, because we're not married. But it's just, it seems not healthy to each other or to anyone else, to be clear. It seems not healthy to me. I mean, like, people, this isn't a Handmaid's Tale world where I know plenty of couples, married people who have different politics and vote differently. It's fine. No one lives we don't live in a world where husbands try to force their wives.
Do you watch the Mormon Housewife show? We were just talking about this when we were getting our
Do I
makeup done
watch
this
the
morning.
Mormon Housewife show?
It is
Probably
wild.
not, Nomiki.
No, I do, and I'm not. It's like, I feel like when I watch these shows, I'm Margaret Mead, and I'm like, who are these amazing specimens who operate this way? It's a wild show, but there was a woman who was interviewed in Georgia. I think she was like 85 or something, and her husband had just died, and she got to vote for the first time, and they interviewed her and said, how did it feel? She goes, I can't wait to do this again. It was so fun. I mean, there are people like that, and older voters in particular, who feel either that they're not allowed to vote, or there's a heavy influence in the home, in pressure, in terms of ideology, and I get it. Like, it's not you, it's not me. I would never stand for that, but there are people who do live in homes like that. With that being said, I do think the Latino vote is going to make a huge difference, and I think the October surprise was that garbage comment, and I think we're seeing that already. Yesterday there was a poll that came out where she's up with Latinos in Pennsylvania now, and that's why today both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are going to appear in Reading, Pennsylvania, with the largest Latino, Puerto Rican in particular, population, and there's no coincidence as to why. So maybe Bad Bunny will show up, maybe Taylor Swift will show up. I think this is the election. It's the Taylor Swift white lady plus Latino Puerto Rican vote. Like, that's the ticket.
I see. Well, we will certainly be, speaking of celebrities, we'll be talking about Kamala Harris's appearance on SNL. Whether that was election interference, we have a guest who thinks so. Stay tuned for more Rising right after this.
Well, Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, the dreaded scourge of misinformation is now frequently listed as one of the top concerns of national security experts, Democratic politicians, and media figures. Mainstream news organizations incessantly warn their readers and viewers that right-wing provocateurs, Republican politicians, and even foreign agents are flooding social media with false information. Tech regulators all over the world, from Brazil to the European Union, are using the threat of misinformation as a pretext to engage in censorship. In the U.S., the First Amendment makes it much more difficult for would-be censors to directly criminalize misinformation, though that won't stop politicians from trying. Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Walz has already suggested, incorrectly, that misinformation and hate speech are unprotected forms of expression. This claim itself is an example of misinformation in that it is a false statement. The Supreme Court has steadfastly maintained that hate speech, for example, is protected by the First Amendment. It's been litigated over and over again. It's the exact sort of thing that is protected. Yet when mainstream Democratic political figures express blatantly incorrect opinions, they seldom attract the misinformation label. This speaks to the one-sidedness of the concept, a one-sidedness that was perfectly illustrated during a CNN panel that I caught last night, and it deserves some attention. Now, the topic of the panel, ironically, was misinformation. Former Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson was interviewed by CNN's Wolf Blitzer about the dangers of misinformation and how malicious lies being spread by right-wing actors are eroding trust in U.S. democracy. Blitzer invited several panelists to respond. Maria Cardona, a Democratic strategist, then attacked former President Donald Trump for spreading misinformation and hate speech. Here's what she said, quote, "Let's remember Charlottesville. Let's remember January 6th. All those events ended in tragedy, and all of those events were spurred on and inspired by the words that came out of the former president's mouth," end quote. CNN contributor Scott Jennings, a Republican, then interrupted Cardona to dispute that Trump's rhetoric caused the 2017 rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, where one person was killed and a dozen others injured by a white nationalist. But Cardona doubled down, asserting that Trump went out there and said both sides are good people. Quote, "I do think he caused Charlottesville," she said. "Those people that were marching in support of one person. They were marching in support of Donald Trump." Watch the clip.
I think that we need to remember exactly his words, that words matter, to your point, Jamal. And Scott, you're right. The former president did get hurt, but it's not the first time. Let's remember Charlottesville. Let's remember January 6th. All of those events ended in tragedy. And all of those events were spurred on and inspired by the words that came out of the former president's mouth.
How did he inspire Charlottesville?
He went out there and said both sides are
But that was after
good
the rally.
people.
You said he caused the rally.
Okay. Scott, the words that the former president says, and you know this, you have that skeptical face, but
yes,
I'm
skeptical that he caused Charlottesville.
This is true. Yes, I do think he did cause Charlottesville because those people that were
who's causing the rallies on campuses right now?
Those people that were marching.
Who's causing the rallies in the streets of New York?
Let me finish. Those people that were marching in support of one person. They were marching in support of Donald Trump, and they were marching in support of what Donald Trump represents. So you can say, try to both sides it with the rallies that were happening on college campuses.
Well, in my humble opinion, those claims are flagrantly wrong. Trump's rhetoric did not cause a group of white nationalists to organize a rally in Charlottesville. Now, the controversy over Trump's remarks in that case has to do with things he said in response to the rally. Now, there too, critics of Trump overreached. As the fact-checking website Snopes has concluded, Trump never said the neo-Nazis were very fine people. He didn't say it. He said neo-Nazis and white nationalists, quote, should be condemned totally. His fine people on both sides comment referred to the debate over whether it was a good idea to remove statues of problematic historical figures. Trump is right about that. Reasonable people can disagree about the wisdom of taking down the statues and about which historical figures deserve extra scrutiny. If Robert E. Lee goes, is Thomas Jefferson next? And then what about George Washington? What about Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves? Left-wing activists have targeted his statue as well, all of these people, not just the Confederate leaders. Is it a slippery slope? I don't know. It's perfectly fine to discuss that. Now, it's also fine to disagree with Trump's handling of the Charlottesville episode or to think that his condemnations did not go far enough. Sure. But no serious person has suggested that remarks by Trump are what spurred on the racism and the violence in Charlottesville in 2017. The rally was organized by explicit white nationalists. Jason Kessler, Richard Spencer, David Duke was there for the purpose of protesting the removal of Confederate General Robert E. Lee's statue. Their efforts were not inspired by or in defense of Donald Trump. It's simply not true. Perhaps Cardona misremembered what the Charlottesville rally was about or confused it with something else. In any case, what she said on television was completely wrong. It's telling, however, that at no point in that clip I just played you, I watched the whole thing, did Blitzer, the host, jump in to accuse Cardona of spreading misinformation. The job of correcting her was left to the conservative co-panelist Scott Jennings, who did a great job. But keep in mind that this was a panel ostensibly highlighting the toxic spread of misinformation. And that's what is just wrong with this entire concept. People spreading bad information accidentally, deliberately, or via some combination of the two. Motivated reasoning is very powerful. It's nothing new. It's been happening on television, on the radio, in print, in books, in everyday conversation, long before social media came into existence. Commentators who fixate on platforms they distrust or partisan actors they dislike frequently treat misinformation like an actual pathogenic disease, all while ignoring falsehoods that arise on their own side, or treating those as mere differences of opinion. Just remember, it's only misinformation when the other guy does it. And I tend not to get worked up about everything I see on cable news that is wrong, and I don't even watch that much. I usually just catch the clips on social media, but I'm like, I'm going to catch up from my vacation, turn on the TV, flipping back and forth between Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. And I'm just kind of like half-heartedly paying attention and I'm making dinner. And then I'm like, wait, is she saying the Trump comment is what caused Charlottesville? Again, that's just wrong. The criticism of Trump was about his response to Charlottesville. And even there I disagree, but at least that, okay, we can have a matter of disagreement. His words didn't inspire, it was organized by white nationalists for a totally different reason.
Right. I mean, that was, even when she was saying it, you probably heard me say that was after those comments were after, and even then, this is a problem I think on the left too, and the right. It happens everywhere, where there's so much information, there's so much being thrown at you, and then the internet, it's like a lie can pass around the world by the time you tie your shoelaces. That old line, it happens like in a heartbeat now, and many years later, because Charlottesville is 2017. You have Maria Cardona, who is on TV a lot, saying a lot of things. I don't always agree with her. We had a nice back and forth during the Bernie-Hillary time, and I think she had some looseness with her facts as well then. But with that being said, there needs to be standards when you go on these shows. And I understand you're not going to be perfect at all times. You don't have all the information, and sometimes these conversations go off in different tangents. But it is important, there's a duty to the audience to try to provide as much information as possible, and at least maybe somebody in her ear was telling her, actually, that was the wrong quote, that was from a different time. They did wear red hats, though. I mean, we do remember when they were marching through the streets, it was a flood of MAGA hats. So did he incite it directly? No. Do Donald Trump's vibes create an environment where that's more likely to happen? Possibly.
Well, Richard Spencer, he's a former white nationalist. He just endorsed Kamala Harris.
I don't understand
David Duke
that.
is a Jill Stein supporter. So it's the prominent people involved here are not even backing Donald Trump. Funny enough, but I think it's interesting. Just I don't mind how they handled it. She said what she said. Scott Jennings said, well, that's why that's not true, and that's how those things can go. We're hosting a television show. We could quarrel with guests, let people, that's fine. But it just gets to me what gets counted as misinformation. Because I'm sure if J.D. Vance was being interviewed on CNN, we've watched this numerous times in recent weeks, he says something that the host thinks is wrong or misinformation, they cut in immediately and say, well, actually, it's not Haitians, those were not they'll correct that.
Vice president, though.
Yeah, but where here she said something that was just totally wrong, and here it's, well, go ahead, debate it. I don't feel like you know how I mean these things are treated differently?
Yeah.
That's just what I'm pointing out.
I mean, there's a standard, if you're running for president and vice president and you're making claims and you said it on a debate stage, yes, that should be fact-checked. I still think Maria Cardona has a duty to have as much information as possible and at least apologize and say, it's a little distracting at this point, but the quote, just so we can be very clear, it was from a transcript the next day of a White House press conference when he was asked, Mr. President, are you putting what you're calling the alt-left and white supremacists on the same moral plane? And Donald Trump responded, excuse me, they didn't put themselves, and you had some very bad people in that group, and you also had some that were very fine people on both sides. So that was that quote, which was in discussion about Charlottesville in the press conference afterwards. But
then he, in that same, a few sentences later, said, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists because they should be condemned totally, but you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists. Again, pointing to the legitimate debate over how to handle monuments to problematic people. I'm not for preserving or Confederate, I don't really care, that's fine, but you know as well as I do that activists have come after, they targeted William Penn, who's like the most progressive kind of founder of America, someone who had good relations with Native Americans and whose Quaker character is responsible for every good thing that happened. Historically illiterate activists, they target, no one is perfect enough. They take down statues to Gandhi for he
was bad with women, but that doesn't mean you take, exactly. It doesn't mean
it's
that
crazy, and we need to have some put up some walls against the concept of just doing total iconoclasm and destroying just recognition of historical figures. That's fine if you want to take down the Robert E. Lee statue. Although what they ultimately did with that, did you see that they melted it? And it was, if you watch the video, it's like you're almost assigning more power and terror to this person by treating his totem and it's the one ring, it has to be destroyed in a volcano. It's just a statue, people.
But to be fair, they put these statues up after the war honoring them. It wasn't something that was, these statues weren't up before. It was, you lost, now you're going to honor them and reinvent history because there was a big movement, there was a lot of money put into these organizations to do that. That's not the case with the Gandhi statues or other statues, like the Penn statue. But with Robert E. Lee in particular, that's a bizarre one.
Well, that's fine, but Trump said himself, he's like, well, then what about Washington? And it was true. And then there were activists saying we should take down the statues of George Washington, a complicated and flawed individual like most people throughout history, but someone who on balance did more good than ill for the country we live in and the values we have today.
We should just put up new statues next to them, alternative history, honoring amazing folks, at least by our standards today, because in 10 years,
they'll say, we stepped on an ant or something. All right, we've got lots more to get into today. Coming up next, Michael Shellenberger will be with us to talk about whether Kamala Harris's appearance on SNL violates FCC rules. Stay around.
Though voter fraud is almost non-existent in U.S. elections, many Americans believe otherwise. That's the subject of a new article Reason magazine reporter Eric Boehm penned, inspired by an explosive claim of voter fraud in Erie, Pennsylvania.
As Boehm recounts in his piece, the allegations of rigged ballots stem from a now viral post on X from Republican canvasser Cliff Maloney, who alleged that more than 50 votes registered from a single address there. Maloney claimed in his post that no one lived at that address, adding, quote, "We will not let the Dems count on illegal votes." But Maloney was incorrect. The votes were, in fact, legitimate. Before I give away any more, let's hear from the source, Eric Boehm, who wrote this piece for Reason, which highlighted how rumors of voter fraud spread like wildfire. Here he is. Thanks so much for joining us, Eric.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Glad to be here.
So who actually lived at this address? Let's start there.
Yeah, sure. So this was Cliff Maloney's post on X a couple of weeks ago was about a monastery outside of Erie, Pennsylvania. And it turns out that, actually hundreds of people do live there. I mean, I think at most addresses, if you saw hundreds of names registered, you would be maybe naturally suspicious. But these are nuns. It's a group of about 70 nuns, the Benedictine Sisters of Erie, who have been there working in that community for, nearly 200 years. It's like the mid 1800s, well established there. And the monastery, the sisters have put out, at this point now had to respond to this story with a series of statements, basically saying that, yes, we do live here. We vote here. It's all legit. And in fact, if you had done even just if Cliff had done even just like the most basic fact checking here, he could have gone to the Benedictine Sisters of Erie's website and seen that many of the names that are listed there as members of that community are the same names that he had registered to that address. So this is pretty cut and dry, not a case of voter fraud. Those votes, if and when they are cast by those sisters, will be legit.
Well, it just shows, a lot of this stuff is weaponized. It doesn't take a lot of work to go through these voter records and the rolls. And I saw some interviews with these nuns, and they were quite passionate too, which was amazing to see how vocal and active they've been in the community. So it's not like they're hiding in secret; they're out there and about political. With that being said, there's backing from groups to, I guess you could say, inspire citizens to go out there and do their own work. Can you tell us a little bit about that kind of effort that's happening across the country right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is all driven by, what Cliff Maloney was doing is what thousands, if not tens of thousands of volunteers were doing all across the country in the last couple of weeks. I had people knock on my door here in Central Virginia to talk to me about the Trump and Harris both over the past few days. There's people going out doing this canvassing work. It's called to try to get people to the polls. It's part of a, get out the vote efforts, particularly in swing states, particularly in a state like Pennsylvania, where the margins are expected to be really thin. And obviously I think there is some incentive to create the perception of voter fraud or of election shenanigans, maybe, particularly on the political right. This has been a talking point, honestly, going back decades, right? Fear of voter fraud. I think it's only ramped up and become kind of more explosive and more politically powerful in the Trump years, and certainly given, everything that happened after the 2020 election. So I think it's important for the rest of us, for, people who cover this, obviously, in the media, like you and I, but then also just the general populace to be aware that there's, an incentive to kind of create these claims, an incentive to try to make the system look as though it's failed in some way, even before we get to Election Day, and that we should be skeptical of these things. I mean, we should be, I think, willing to, we shouldn't be willing to dismiss necessarily out of hand all claims of voter fraud, but until there is some substantial actual proof, we shouldn't go ahead believing everything that you read on social media.
Right, because obviously it does occur that people vote illicitly or in some way that does not correspond to the law. What has not demonstrated is that it is so massive and just one-sided, right? You have people who are voting Republican doing that and people who are voting Democrat. Like, I'm sure it happens. I got mailed I live in an apartment in D.C., and I got mailed the ballot for the previous person who lived there. I still get all his mail, and I put that ballot in the trash. I did not cast a second vote for the Libertarian Party, even though I could have. But maybe I couldn't have, because then later there's some screening thing that finds out, that he's not registered there, or he was registered somewhere else. So I'm sure it happens. It's just the vast conspiracy about it is not correct.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And look, there are processes in place, and that's something else that I don't think gets talked about enough, is that even the results that we see reported on election night and in the days after will be unofficial results. There's actually a weeks-long process that goes on first at the precinct level, then at the county level, and finally at the state level. Again, somewhat confusingly, this is also referred to as canvassing, even though it's actually a very different process than the political get-out-the-vote efforts that go on before the election. But this is to verify and check exactly what you were saying, to verify and check all the ballots that are cast, to make sure that the numbers are correct. And yes, there are instances of voter fraud. No election is perfect. I think when I went back, was writing this piece, I went back and found an Associated Press article from a couple of years ago that said they had looked through all of the records of 6 different swing states and found 475 instances where votes may have been cast either, maybe fraudulently, maybe just incorrectly, maybe counted incorrectly, something like that. 475 cases in a country where, 150 million votes are going to be cast, probably not enough to make any sort of swing in the election. I think, Ohio prosecuted a few dozen people after the last election for voting twice. These are typically mistakes, either mistakes on the part of the voter, mistakes on the part of the poll worker who should tell somebody, no, you're voting in the wrong precinct. You have to go vote over there, not over here. Some sort of mistake maybe in tabulating. What we don't have any evidence of, and what we certainly would have seen evidence of given the amount of scrutiny that was applied after the 2020 election, but we didn't see any evidence of widespread, broad, conspiratorial election fraud that was meant to swing the outcome from one candidate to another, in which case you're talking about tens of thousands, if not more, votes that would have to be cast. Look, there were something like 60 different court challenges in the aftermath of the 2020 election. There were electoral audits by state lawmakers in Arizona and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and a few other places too, I think. And none of that turned up any of this evidence that, that Rudy Giuliani and other, particularly of Trump supporters, were talking about after that election. So if we didn't find it in 2020, I think it's probably safe to conclude that it didn't exist. And I think, look, you can believe in things like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, right? But until you see evidence of them, I don't think you should be giving them electoral votes. And so that's kind of where we are with the voter fraud thing, too, is that the evidence is simply, doesn't show that there is broad-based this kind of chaotic election fraud that some people, mostly on the right, I think, have an interest in creating the perception of.
Which leads to this point that Donald Trump in the last couple of days, in particular in Pennsylvania, which is kind of ripe ground for this too, just because the electoral laws are, they don't have early voting, and he was complaining about the long lines for on-demand mail balloting, and J.D. Vance was saying that there was voter fraud, so much so that the Republican Secretary of the Commonwealth called him out and said that's not true. Donald Trump said we caught him with 2,600 votes in Lancaster, but how much of this is really about something they truly believe, and how much of it is maybe to set the stage for another 2020 where they challenge the election?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that. A lot of it is about creating that perception. Also, this is all, none of the votes have been counted yet. And particularly in Pennsylvania, this is going to be an issue, and it's something people should be aware of going forward. That's one of, Wisconsin being the other, one of 2 big swing states where they're not allowed to begin counting the mail-in votes until Election Day itself, which obviously means there will be delays in getting that number of votes counted, the number of mail-in votes that come in. Pennsylvania has something like more than 2 million mail-in ballots requested. So that's a huge chunk of the votes in the state that we likely will not know the outcome of on election night. And then that I think then feeds this narrative of, we don't know the results, or the results might change as days go on. And rather than indicating fraud, I think that indicates that the process is working as it should, because it does take time to verify and to process, particularly those mail-in ballots, all of which have to be opened by hand and read by hand and processed and verified by hand. So that does take some time. But to your point about, the perception out there, I think this does matter. And I think really important to point out that there was a UMass Amherst poll last week that showed just 39% of people in that poll said they were very confident that their votes would be counted correctly in this election. Like there is this fear in the electorate, and it's not something that exists only on the political right. I think it does exist in the kind of general milieu of election anxiety across the entire political spectrum here. There is concern about this, and that will only, I think, help anybody who wants to then benefit from this narrative of election fraud in the days and weeks after the election. The most important thing really is for people just to remain patient and let the process play out, because as we talked about, there are numerous checks in this process to make sure that we get the count right. And as those numbers shift maybe a little bit one way or the other after Election Day, that's mostly proof that the process is working as intended, not evidence of some sort of fraud or malfeasance.
Eric Boehm, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Robby.
In a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, podcaster Joe Rogan pushed Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman to discuss immigration and its political ramifications. Let's watch.
They had an opportunity to do a comprehensive border, bipartisan, and that went down because Trump he declared that's a bad deal after it was negotiated with the other side.
But didn't that deal also involve amnesty, and didn't that deal also involve a significant number of illegal aliens being allowed into the country every year? I think it was 2 million people. So it was still the same sort of situation, and their fear is exactly what I talked about, that these people will be moved to swing states, and that will be used to essentially rig those states and turn them blue forever.
Well, I'm not really sure if that's what's in play. I think it's really it's important that we have an honest conversation.
But doesn't that seem logical, though? If you have a significant number of people that are being moved into swing states that have come across the border illegally, and then you've provided them with all these services, you provided them with food stamps, EBT, you've provided them with housing. You could, if you gave those people amnesty and allowed those people to vote, and it was very organized. You're talking about 75,000 votes over a few counties that switched everything over to the Republicans. You could see how you import 10 million people over the course of 4 years illegally, and then move a significant number of them to swing states, and then provide them with all these services, and then give them a path to citizenship. You could essentially rig those states.
Undeniably, immigration is changing our nation. I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time in Texas, but it's very clear that immigration has remade Texas, and I think it's for a good.
Credit to John Fetterman for going on Joe Rogan and saying a lot of things I think are pretty insightful. Lately, he's a kind of culturally moderate voice on the Democratic Party. But yeah, here grappling with the reality, and this is the conservative accusation that the immigrants are going to be brought in, and that this is going to be, that first they're getting all these benefits and housing, etc. That I don't want to offer them. I'm fine with immigrants coming in. I want them to come in legally, but I don't want them coming in for handouts or abusing the social services. I want them to come in and work, and then that's fine. And if they become citizens, they can vote. And I'm not particularly worried about their voting practices, because I actually know that many of these immigrants are conservative rather than liberal. And so there's a little bit of fatalism on the Republican side about immigration, because what we're finding is that particularly Latino immigrants from down south are in many cases culturally conservative and anti-socialist, and are less hostile to American values than many affluent, well-educated white and black people who are born here. But that's not to dispute the point that if you bring in 10 million people and put them in the swing states and create some dependency for them on the welfare state, then maybe they would be voting for Democrats.
I think this is all on the assumption that, number one, they're going to swing states. There's no real evidence of that. Most of the migrants that are being bused and flown from Texas are being flown to states like New York and Pennsylvania, and because that's been pretty out there and open that they want to put the burden on the cities.
Well, Pennsylvania is a swing state.
Well, you're right. Pennsylvania is a state.
The swing state.
But they're not voting, number one. These are not legal immigrants. They can barely find housing right now. They were just allowed, at least in New York, to work jobs like Uber and Lyft and delivery services.
Which is great. I'm all for that. That's great.
And it's actually improved our job numbers. I mean, the last jobs report, there was a very clear indication that some of these immigrants who've come here who don't have status yet have actually improved our jobs report, at least for low-wage jobs. Of course, they're also not getting a minimum wage in some cases. I mean, there's all sorts of complications. But even then, the swing states, just to finish the point, a lot of these swing states don't have the services that Joe Rogan is alleging. So I think sometimes Joe Rogan...
Well, they have food stamps.
Some do, but they're not for people who are not documented. You know, it really depends on the state you're in. And I think that's my issue with Joe Rogan is sometimes he's making a point and it sounds really thoughtful, but he kind of like veers off into conspiracy land without providing real evidence to the point where, you know, John Fetterman, frankly, I don't think he was prepared for it, and that he's not used to hearing these kinds of things regularly. And you can have valid concerns in reality about immigration and a real plan. And like you said, his generalizing all Latinos. First off, the majority of migrants who are coming over the border right now are actually coming from China, which is a fascinating discovery that CBS made this year. So we assume that they're all Latinos. You know, some are Haitian, some are from Venezuela, some are from other parts of South America, Honduras, Guatemala, where they all have complicated relationships with supposed socialist or leftist governments. I wouldn't say that Venezuela is really left, but that's a whole other conversation. But they do, like you said, they have more conservative values. And so I also get annoyed that there's this like generalization of a group of people, which shows me how little work he's doing in understanding who these immigrants are that he's so afraid of.
Well, but there's also even if they're not voting, we always do have to remember, because undocumented or illegal immigrants do count for the census data that determines how how much congressional representation and then how many electoral votes. So even if they are highly concentrating in more, not exclusively in blue states, but it does tip more in a blue direction. Obviously, there's a lot of them in Texas. Yeah. So them being in Texas is a boost to Republican congressional representation. But California is a boost to Democratic, California, New York, and Illinois, the other main states where immigrants go to. If they get a higher population over time, even if the immigrants aren't voting, they're raising the number of electoral college votes that those states get. That could be a contribution to Democratic, to a good thing for the Democratic Party, and I think that's the smart version of that argument.
Except, and I hear you, that is true, but the numbers are not always fully accurate, because a lot of folks who are undocumented do not want to speak to authorities. They don't even when crimes happen, it's highly undocumented. The crimes are undocumented because the undocumented people feel distrust as they should, with authorities, because they could, lose their jobs, lose their homes, be deported depending on where they are. And that's the whole concept of sanctuary cities, is having this system in place where it is easier to have an accurate count, even issuing licensees to some of them so that they know how many folks are in the community, how many resources to provide, have more accountability to law enforcement or in other services. I mean, folks don't feel comfortable going to government because they're afraid they're going to get busted, essentially, and deported.
Well, I don't feel comfortable talking to the government because I'm distrustful of them, and I don't want, when it comes up with the census and they want to ask you, all sorts of invasive personal questions, just count us and move on. Yeah,
and it's general, the census too. Like, how many different ethnic groups are like, I don't want to be lumped in with Anglo-Saxons, and so there's a lot of other cultural stuff that's happening where you have different groups saying like, I feel like I'm not being represented in the census, or I'm half Latino, half Asian, or it's complicated. So we just don't have a deep understanding of like identity in this country.
Well, and a lot of people want to just identify as American, or there are Latino people who don't even like that, saying this is not different from white and would just identify as American.
I think it depends on what generation.
That comes out of the census. All right, coming up next, Peanuts the squirrel murdered by the deep state. We're going to talk about that. Stay tuned. More Rising right after this.
The appearance heard around the world. Vice President Kamala Harris stopped by Saturday Night Live this weekend in a surprise appearance on the last episode before the 2024 presidential election. And her appearance might have gotten the network in some legal trouble. Some commentators on the right are even calling it election interference. We'll return to that in a moment, but here, let's watch that episode from this Saturday.
It is nice to see you, Kamala. It is nice to see you, Kamala. And I'm just here to remind you, you got this. Because you can do something your opponent cannot do. You can open doors. see what you did there, like to a garbage truck, right? I don't really laugh like that, do I? A little bit. Now, Kamala, take my Pamela. The American people want to stop the chaos and end the drama with a cool new stepmamala. Kick back in our pajamas and watch a rom Kamala. Like Legally Blondula. And start decorating for Christmas. Fa la 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 la.
Well, not everyone is laughing along. Federal Communications Commissioner Brendan Carr wrote on X, "This is a clear and blatant effort to evade the FCC's equal time rule. The purpose of that rule is to avoid exactly this type of biased and partisan conduct, a licensed broadcaster using the public airwaves to exert its influence for one candidate on the eve of an election. Now, unless the broadcaster offered equal time to other qualifying campaigns. NBC News aired a short video message from former President Donald Trump on Sunday evening in an effort to provide the presidential candidate with equal airtime. According to the Washington Examiner, a Trump campaign official said SNL never extended an invite for Trump to appear this weekend. Independent journalist Michael Shellenberger says that NBC's actions amount to insane election interference. Shellenberger is founder of Public on Substack, and he joins us now. Great to see you, Michael.
Good to see you guys.
So lay out for us what is the alleged legal violation that you think has occurred.
Sure. Well, I mean, a lot of people don't know that the broadcast networks, as part of the American people giving them the spectrum so they can, broadcast through the airwaves, they have a legal obligation to give equal time to political candidates. The other thing that people don't realize is that there's actually something called a 7-day rule, which you're actually supposed to give candidates 7 days to protest if you think that your opponent has been given unjust amounts of time. Well, I mean, that clearly, both rules were clearly violated. What's so significant about this, though, Robby, is that the famous head of Saturday Night Live, Lorne Michaels, gave an interview to Hollywood Reporter in mid-September where he said he would not have either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump on Saturday Night Live before the election, because it would actually require also having Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Jill Stein, the other presidential candidates, because the law actually requires all the candidates, not just the frontrunners, to have equal time. So NBC clearly knew the law. I mean, of course they did. I mean, they've got, President Obama's former lawyer is the general counsel to NBC, so it's inconceivable they didn't know, but they admitted they knew the law. It's very clear that they violated the law knowingly and did so before there would be proper time to react. So NBC did kind of cram in, as you mentioned, a little ad from Trump after NASCAR last night, but that doesn't bring them into compliance. It's by no means anywhere near comparable. I mean, I pointed out today on X that Kamala Harris, that little clip that you just showed with, her with Maya Rudolph, has been viewed over 9 million times on YouTube. There's no way that little thing they put on after NASCAR will be viewed that many times. So look, these media companies they've been campaigning for Kamala Harris, and that might be fine for many media, but these are media that are under a different set of rules because they're broadcast.
What's interesting about this is Brendan Carr, who is the commissioner who tweeted, which was an interesting way of kind of calling this out rather than going through normal means of issuing a statement, is that he didn't note that the NBC had filed a notice with the FCC and will provide former President Donald Trump with equal time following that appearance. But Brendan Carr is also somebody who has been called out this summer by Congress for violating the Hatch Act, and that while he was in office, he helped author an entire chapter of the notable Project 2025 manual, whatever that giant encyclopedia of Heritage Foundation's dreams. So, this is obviously political. You mentioned that the NBC attorney is somebody who was in the Obama administration. Brendan Carr was speaking outside of FCC on Twitter, noting this, but did not note that NBC did actually file a notice. So is that something, offering Donald Trump an ad and also offering an extension of coming on SNL and appearing on NBC, doesn't that seem to solve the problem?
Well, so first of all, I mean, he did post the FCC notice, but that notice came after he and many others, including us, made, raised so many concerns about it. So it's not the case. And it's also, we don't know whether or not he made the case internally at FCC. Remember, this all happens on the weekend. So I think it's perfectly legitimate. In fact, it's a wonderful, purpose to actually make these things public on X. And we're also talking about, it all gets crammed right up before the elections. I didn't know that Commissioner Carr had written anything for Project 2025. My understanding is that the Trump administration has been running from any association with that, so it's hard to see that as politicking. But of course, I think the Hatch Act is under-enforced personally. I mean, we've documented now how the FBI, DHS, CIA have all been involved in election interference efforts over the last several years. I view this as just an extension of the kinds of abuses of power that we've been documenting, from the U.S. government involvement in creating a censorship industrial complex to the weaponization of different government agencies. I think we're past due for a kind of cleaning of the house like we saw in the mid-'70s with the Church Committee. I hope that whoever is elected, that the Senate takes that mantle up. But I think the other thing that we're seeing here, the biggest story right now, in addition to the presidential election and related to it, is just the complete collapse of credibility for the mainstream news media. I mean, they're at 31% trust of the public. We see, Kamala Harris made a choice to spend several hours shooting that SNL video and decided not to sit down with Joe Rogan, even though he had extended an offer to her. I think that this is pretty game-changing, that in the future, people running for office need to be able to sit down and have a long, serious conversation. I think this older model, because people point out that other candidates have been on SNL, this older model where the networks kind of give you a few sound bites here and there, I think that's now in the past, and we're entering into a new era that's I think quite game-changing and is as significant as the transition from newspapers and radio to television.
Yeah, I don't want to overstate what I suspect will be the influence of Kamala Harris appearing on SNL, because I think the people still watching SNL, I don't find it very funny. I find it shrill and liberal, and so the people who are really tuning in are already pretty enthusiastic about Kamala Harris. But that said, let's say the FCC determines that this does violate their rule. There isn't time to get Trump, even if he would want to be on SNL, there's not another Saturday night before the election. But what is the enforcement or punishment? Because if you want to go maximum, let's say, they were willing to do anything to help Kamala, no matter how slightly significant it might be, and we'll take whatever penalty. Is that just a fine? At the end of the day, it could be like, fine, pay it if they care that much. It doesn't affect them that dramatically.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I also will point out, I haven't loved Saturday Night Live that much lately myself, but I think it's also important to know that it does skew to a much younger audience. That's pretty well established. And, reaching young men has been a big priority for Kamala Harris. She's lost so many of them. We're in totally new territory. I mean, Commissioner Carr said that really nothing like this has ever happened before, so they don't exactly have case law on it. But I think one important thing he did point out is that when the FCC, when President Obama's appointee was the chair, specifically on an SNL case, said that you had to have equal time, specifically as it related to SNL. It was actually a case where equal time clearly did apply. So, yeah, I just think for me, I don't know, like a slap on the wrist, obviously afterwards is not going to make up for it if it does have an effect on the election. And I think it's also right to point out there's just so many things going on. But I think when you kind of put this together with all the other things that have happened, including the media's false claim that Trump called for the assassination of Liz Cheney, the media's false claim that the Trump campaign had embraced vaccine skepticism, the false claim that the rally in New York by Trump was fascist and racist. There's a lot of reasons not to like Donald Trump and vote against Donald Trump. It's not about that. I just think that the media has been so one-sided. And when it's cable news or the internet, that's one thing. But when it's these broadcast spectrum, there's a different set of rules, and maybe those need to change, but those are what the rules and the laws are now.
Michael Shellenberger, thank you so much for joining us. As always, we appreciate it. Republican candidate in New Hampshire, Lily Tang Williams, skewered her Democratic opponent, Maggie Goodlander, last Thursday in a debate between the two. Goodlander is married to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. She accused Tang Williams of favoring the rich. Williams fired back. Here's that exchange. It was glorious. Let's watch.
This is a worldview that my opponent has embraced. She believes that we should give a break to the wealthiest and the biggest corporations and hope for the best. Hope that the results will trickle down to hardworking people. I take a very different approach. I believe that the middle class deserves a tax cut, and I believe that we will do a lot for this country by ensuring that we don't continue this disastrous tax policy.
Ms. Tong Williams.
You are wealthy. You are worth $20 million to $30 million. How do you know about regular people suffering? Do you go shopping, go to Walmart, buy food? I talk to those people. And you pretend to be renter in Nashua a few months ago, move back to run for this open seat with millions of dollars from Washington, D.C. insiders. And the millions of dollars, I don't have money to run a TV ad. And you pretend you are poor, complain rent is so high. You couldn't save that apartment for other people to rent in Nashua. Just go back to your $2 million home in Portsmouth. Please don't say that, because you do not understand regular people's concern.
According to fresh polling, Democrats are leading in the congressional race in the Granite State. Per local news WMUR, Goodlander is topping Tang 51 to 43%. This got
video
a lot of
went
attention.
very viral
Yes, it
on
did.
social media. A lot of commentary from my side of the aisle. Lily Tang Williams, formerly was part of the Libertarian Party, ran as a Libertarian candidate, still identifies, I think, as a very Libertarian-inclined Republican, moved to New Hampshire. There was an effort by many Libertarians to move to New Hampshire, the Free State Project. It's one of the more Libertarian-leaning ideologically states in the nation. She's someone who fled communist Chinese oppression as a Chinese immigrant, and is running, she says, to stop us from going down that path of dreaded top-down authoritarian economic control.
I mean, it's interesting for sure. She's also wealthy too, so the fact that she says she can't afford to buy an ad is different than I cannot personally afford to, because she is personally wealthy. Both of them are wealthy.
Well, she's wealthy. She worked her way to the top. She came here with, she said, with nothing, and started a business, and is a terrific. This is why I don't think the GOP should demonize immigrants. Look, this is an immigrant who came here with nothing, built successful companies, and is now running to stop socialism from taking over. This is what we could have.
Except she wants to put tariffs on China, which of course is going to rise.
Well, everybody wants to put tariffs on China.
Well, it's going to increase the cost of living for people.
Joe Biden
in
has
Nashua.
put tariffs on China.
He has. We've talked about that, but Donald Trump's only answer to everything right now is tariffs on China, which of course pretty much every.
Joe Biden agrees with him on that.
Not increased, but anyways, I think that the bigger conversation here is, can a wealthy person be patriotic? I mean, the Kennedys famously.
Well, of course they can.
Yeah, and so I think this doesn't necessarily work with folks, because the policies of Goodlander are the ones that are alleviating the stress for the middle class. I mean, the policies that Lily Tang Williams is pushing are isolationist. She wants, some of the gun issues obviously is going to play well in New Hampshire, but she is not pushing for solving the housing crisis by building more housing.
I think she is. I don't know what her, as a libertarian,
control.
Her view is we want to get rid of obstructions to building more housing. The number one reason we can't build housing in this country is restrictions on where and when you can build, restrictions imposed by NIMBY type liberal people and people of all ideologies to thwart new development. We want to get rid of all of that. I would not say that Jake Sullivan's wife's policies are the policies that are going to enrich the middle class. I don't know exactly what her policies are, but the policies of the Democratic administration that her husband is a part of has been to raise, to worsen at every turn inflation by having massive government spending.
Down. It's been down. It's gone down drastically in the last. It's almost normalized at this point. Problem is that we can't turn back those numbers. And those numbers, the inflation did start under Trump, and of course it was a result of COVID, so we can't forget that. And the economy was not doing great under COVID and prior to COVID with Trump. So we are at a more stable place. It doesn't mean that people are feeling the pain still. I mean, I feel the pain when I went to order a glass of wine at a restaurant last night in Washington, D.C., and it was $20, and it was not like a bougie place. I'm like, what is this? And don't we have happy hours anymore? That's a whole other conversation. but this is like.
This is why I drink so heavily alone at home. It's cheaper.
It's your conference and your Florida vacation. I'm sure Miami was not cheap at all.
Although it's not more expensive than here. DC is worse by far.
And New York is. I mean, I live in Queens, and when I go into Manhattan, I'm like, it's like entering a new country. Yeah. Queens is not cheap either. Yeah. But it is.
But people are feeling this all around the country, and that as I think we mentioned this in A Block, Nate Silver did some analysis of areas in the country where inflation has remained high, because it's vast place, there's differences everywhere. Areas of the country where inflation has remained high have been problem spots for Harris, and that goes to people calling this the second COVID election, because a lot of the money spent during COVID has had, economists will say, an inflationary effect that lingers in some parts of the country, and Americans are not happy about it.
And also wages. So inflation is still high in big cities, but the wages are higher. And so if you're not having that wage increase in conjunction with the inflation being still high, or the rates still being feeling higher, I should say, it's not solving the problem. And in a place like New Hampshire, just to bring it back to this congressional race, people are feeling it in a more intense way. There's a lot of rural, I'm sure you've been in New Hampshire before, there's a lot of rural communities in New Hampshire, and independent thinking folks.
I went to New Hampshire to attend, to speak at Pork Fest, a gathering of libertarians.
Different type of pork,
wonderful.
Not like government pork, not...
No, because it's porcupine is the symbol, is, don't tread on, don't step on me, I'll poke you with my sharp porcupine needles.
I thought it was like
exercise my rights.
Government pork.
No, they are against that as well.
Yeah, they are. That's what I figured. Not like actual pork. One time, my friend was turning 30 and we were in Chicago, and we went to this piano bar, and it was the International Pork Conference, Pork Conference, and there were all these pork lobbyists there. And I learned way too much about pork lobbying, so.
I've got a weirder one than that. I was in Toronto speaking at, and doing a debate on social media regulation. I was in a hotel. And it's not in Toronto itself. Toronto's just the closest city I was to. I don't know where anything is in Canada. But the alarm went off in the hotel, like the fire alarm, so we had to all leave the hotel. And there were all these ladies in provocatively dressed, fishnet stockings and green paint. And finally I asked, what's the deal? They said they were there for ShrekCon. Did you know there's such a thing? ShrekCon? I think it's kind of a sexual thing.
How did I not know about this my whole entire life? You know where I'll be after the election.
Anyway, some other thing I wanted to get to today, and this is just not TrekCon, but the congressional race is the most closely related thing. We talked already today about the SNL appearance by Kamala Harris and the debate over whether that's a campaign finance violation or FCC violation. Kamala Harris was not the only one to appear SNL. There was also Tim Kaine, who, in case you have never heard that name before, he actually was the vice presidential nominee for Hillary Clinton. The joke was about how no one knows or remembers who he is, which is a joke I've made many times, and I actually do think is funny. But he is being challenged right now. He's a candidate. He has a Republican opponent, Hung Kao, who is within striking distance, although it's going to be a difficult race, surely. And so I think there's an argument that was an even more sort of thumb on the scale.
But it was like talking about him versus,
the whole thing was about remember my name. This is what my name is. When you go into the ballot box, Tim Kaine.
There's another one like this though, where
it's funny, but it was like, okay, that's exactly the kind of thing I think the FCC regulation was designed to prevent.
Maybe, but there's a lot of comedy that you could go over the years and see. I'm not a witch. Those. Basically everything SNL does in the lead up to an election is talk about and make light of different types of things that are happening on the campaign trail. My favorite one, and this is very insider New York, I'm surprised they did it, was Assemblymember Harvey Epstein, who I know, and he's a great guy. He's running for city council in New York, and the whole ad was about how Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein, I am not related to either one of them. Stop getting confused. I am a good guy. And they're interviewing people, and they're like, everyone deserves a second chance. And he's like, I'm on my first chance, guys.
That is funny. All right, we've got more to talk about today, including, finally, Peanuts, the squirrel, victim of government oppression and murder. Stay tuned, more Rising right after this. Former President Barack Obama made his closing argument Sunday in Wisconsin for voters to cast their ballot for Kamala Harris. He said that no matter what questions you may have about her, she respects people of, quote, all races and faiths. For Black and Latino voters, he said,
whose family business was sued for not renting to folks that look like you, who cannot apparently understand how an NBA superstar could be both Greek and Black, who suggests any Mexican crossing the border is a criminal and a rapist, who spreads ridiculous fantasies that Haitians are eating people's pets, who just this past week arranged for one of his supporters to tell jokes about black people eating watermelon and Puerto Rico being an island of garbage right there on stage at Madison Square Garden. Do you think that's somebody who's going to look out for you?
And then, for Muslims and Jewish American voters, he said this.
Maybe you're Muslim American or Jewish American, and you are heartbroken and furious about the ongoing bloodshed in the Middle East and worried about the rise of anti-Semitism. Why would you place your faith in somebody who instituted a so-called Muslim ban, who sat down for pleasantries with Holocaust deniers, who said that there were very fine people on both sides of a white supremacist rally?
So we'll dig into those comments now. I mean, I would say that those are a number of aggressively editorialized, if not outright false. As I explained today on my radar, he did not call neo-Nazis very fine people. He said there were fine people on both sides of the issues of whether we should take down statues. He did not call neo-Nazis very fine people. He did not deliberately or willingly or knowingly meet with Holocaust deniers. I assume he's referring to the meeting with Kanye West, in which Kanye West brought, I believe it was Nick Fuentes. Trump said he didn't know who that was and would not have intended to ever meet with him. Again, I will point out that actual white nationalist leaders are not lining up behind Donald Trump, including because of his support for Israel. Richard Spencer, formerly the leader of the alt-right, although I think he has renounced most of his white nationalist, or maybe all of his white nationalist opinions, I don't know, has endorsed Kamala Harris. David Duke is supporting Jill Stein. I don't think that's an indictment of either candidate. In fact, there's no shortage of crazy or bad people, saying I like this candidate and that person has to denounce them. It's fine, it happens on all sides. But to uniquely point to Donald Trump as this avatar of racism or white nationalism or anti-Muslim bigotry, I don't think this is it's not persuasive to many Arab American voters in my home state of Michigan who have actually endorsed Donald Trump because they think it'll be more likely there will be peace in Gaza if he is president. I don't think they're wrong necessarily. We know what we're going to get from Kamala Harris because it's going to be the same thing from Joe Biden, which is just a whatever Israel wants policy.
That's not exactly what they're doing, as you know. But
it's exactly
it is not exactly what they're doing. And I mean, you don't warn you're going to get sanctioned if you don't put humanitarian aid. Are they doing enough? Absolutely not, and you know that, and we've had this conversation many times. But Donald Trump
says it's gone too far.
Trump literally wants to build condos in Gaza with his family. I mean, let's be real here. Yes, well, it's his family, and conveniently, Donald Trump can't do it while he's in office because he's the president.
Not put Jared Kushner in charge of foreign policy again. That was a big mistake.
Horrible mistake.
Kushner is an internationalist liberal Democrat who does not at all have the MAGA America First view that voters elected Donald Trump to implement. I think that's 100% the case. I think he should not listen to Jared Kushner.
I don't think Jared Kushner is a liberal and by any means. If it's classic liberal,
I mean, he was a Democrat until Donald Trump started running for president.
And his positioning is very conservative. I mean, I think he's more in line with a more institutional conservative Republican Party. Not even like Dick Cheney level. I mean, this.
Well, Dick Cheney is a Democrat
now. Well, no.
Dick Cheney is not a Republican.
Dick Cheney is not a Democrat. Just
no, the Cheneys are
Democrats.
Democrats have absorbed the neoconservatives into their fold.
Dick Cheney profited off the war. The Democrats.
Yeah, and now he's supporting
Barack
Kamala Harris. What does that
Obama
tell you?
didn't have weapons manufacturers in his family making money off the war, or personally so. With that being said, it does mean that we have to win votes from somewhere, and I don't love that they're supporting Kamala Harris. I don't think George W. Bush should be announcing his endorsement. I don't think it's going to help. I think that people like Nicole Wallace, who used to work for George W. Bush, pushing for that, and Liz Cheney pushing for that, are delusional and out of touch with where most Americans feel, George W. Bush was.
Well, you and I agree that Nicole Wallace is delusional.
Okay, but with this
a rare point of agreement between us.
I don't hate her. Okay, so let's make that clear. I just don't think that her strategy's the right strategy, and that's why she was in communications and not in strategy. With that being said, what Barack Obama was doing was making it clear who Donald Trump is and what he represents. I mean, the Republicans, Mike Pence, said it was wrong for Donald Trump to host the Holocaust denier with Kanye at Mar-a-Lago. Nick Fuentes.
Well, sure, it was wrong, but he didn't
But they
know
vet
who
him.
that was.
Obviously, he was a sitting president. They have Secret Service that vet everything. Have you ever had to go to a presidential event and get your name screened? They know your background, everything. They know very well who you are before you go and sit down with the president. It's just convenient afterwards. They always take 2 steps back and say, well, we didn't know. We didn't know what the joke was going to be at MSG,
Trump said
despite the fact.
Whoever did the screening should be fired for letting that person through. But
and he loves to fire people. Did he fire that person? Probably not.
I don't know.
But Barack Obama is making a point that there's a lot at stake here. And it's not just that if you choose, and there are few voters for Trump, but that is very much in line with the traditional numbers of Muslim Americans and Jewish Americans who vote for Trump. That has not shifted much. The concern is that Muslim voters are going to be voting for Jill Stein in swing states or staying home. And there's just too much at risk right now. And we have to remind people, this is what happens when you vote for someone like Jill Stein, who, by the way, shows up every 4 years, has no association with the environmental movement. Not only that, but she's invested personally in oil and gas and weapons manufacturing and the Keystone XL pipeline. This is not a progressive by any means, and so I think it's important to illustrate that.
So Nick Fuentes, the white nationalist Holocaust denier who was at this meeting with Trump, he has denounced repeatedly the Trump campaign. He thinks...
Today or back then when he met
a month ago,
well, no,
in
but
August.
Then. But back then...
But that's what I'm saying. White nationalists are not supporting Trump.
That's
they
today,
hate
though.
Trump.
They
are against Trump. They think Trump will never do what they want. So the idea that Trump is an avatar of this kind of thing that I talked about it in my radar. The Democrats are obsessed with this narrative that Hitler, fascist, white nationalists, etc. Those actual people don't agree. They don't think that. They're in support of other candidates. They're looking for other candidates.
Chaos. I mean, that was...
No, they think he's not committed at all.
I watched the Richard Spencer video, which was 11 minutes I'd like back from my life, but he did talk about how Trump was chaos, and they want things on their terms, and he is not somebody who's predictable. They did meet with him and support him for
the Trump is chaos is hard to sustain. That I mean, we have chaos right now in our foreign policy.
That's their claim. That's not my claim.
Sure.
That's their claim. So if they're rejecting Donald Trump for reasons of chaos, they still supported him at the time when Donald Trump hosted Nick Fuentes at the White House, and that's what Obama was saying. I don't think it's wrong for Obama to say these things. I think that's what Obama needs to be doing. He's not trying to win over MAGA. We are not trying to win MAGA over. We are trying to get people off their chairs and their couches. I hope not. Then we've gone way too far.
I think that's a bad strategy. I mean,
that's politics 101.
Republicans are trying to win over Democrats. They're trying to Democrats have been bad for you and your family. They have ruined the economy.
Donald Trump's strategy right now.
To inflation. Donald Trump, you remember the 4 years under Donald Trump. This is their pitch. They were a good 4 years. They were good for the economy. The world was a safer, saner place. Then COVID happened and everything, the table got overturned and it was bad. And Donald Trump did not respond to that well in a variety of ways. And so people voted for Joe Biden. The Joe Biden years have not brought stability to this country. In fact, things are more unstable than ever. The Middle East is a mess. The Russia stuff, the China stuff. We don't even know if Joe Biden is conscious or capable of dealing with these problems
Robby,
at this point. In fact, I think
that's
he's very much
your campaign strategy. That is not the Donald Trump campaign strategy.
Well, that's what I would be saying and talking about solely.
We are literally one day from the election, and they are focusing on turnout, as the Harris campaign is focusing on turnout. So talking to the voters in Michigan who are sitting on their couches right now, not sure because they're angry at the Mideast, whether you're Jewish or Muslim, that's about turnout. That is not about convincing MAGA to come over to our side, to the Democratic side. And that strategy might have worked 6 months ago for Donald Trump. But right now, he is focusing on getting the most extreme voters to the polls, some of whom probably aren't even registered to vote at this point, young male conservative voters. That's their entire strategy right now, getting them out to vote.
I know the Democratic strategy is your husband hates you. Don't tell him what you're doing and vote for Kamala Harris.
Well, that's for some women,
that's the I don't know. It's a shrill, hysterical, unlikable, feminist pitch.
Shrill.
That's it's
misogyny
it's
101. Come on now.
It's hectoring. It's just. I think it's a very, very bad pitch. What they're going with in their closing days. It's did you take out the trash kind of pitch to voters.
Well, luckily, they're not trying to win over those MAGA male voters.
Okay.
They're trying to win over women who might be in relationships with people they don't agree with and just say, it is okay to sometimes not always be lockstep with your husband.
We know that. We've got a lot more.
We're married, right?
We clarified on the show today, Very much not the case. All right, coming up next on Rising, who is Lily Tang Williams? She's a libertarian Republican candidate who had some harsh words for her opponent, Jake Sullivan's wife. We will watch that clip and react. Stay tuned.
Peanut the squirrel, the beloved Insta-famous pet, was euthanized last week after being apprehended by New York State. Fred the raccoon was put to death too. The pair was seized from Mark Longo and his wife's home, the animal's guardians, so they could be tested for rabies, per a statement from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Longo cared for a 7-year-old squirrel after it was orphaned. He regularly documented Peanut's daily activities on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, where the furry friend amassed a large following, boasting over 688,000 followers on Instagram alone.
Just goes to show you that they can still kill you if you have a large Instagram following. Republican Congressman Nick Langworthy, who represents New York's 23rd District, where the pets were apprehended and put down, denounced the state's move, claiming overreach by Governor Kathy Hochul's administration. Longworthy shared an Elon Musk post that reads, quote, "Government overreach kidnapped an orphan squirrel and executed him." Musk also wrote, "Vote for Peanut, for liberty, for freedom." New York Assemblyman Jake Blumenkrantz blasted DED as well, calling the incident a tragedy and saying on X, quote, "As a state lawmaker and an animal rights advocate, this tragedy can be an agent of change." Blumenkrantz introduced Peanut's Law, which would mandate a 72-hour waiting period before an animal from a sanctuary can be put to sleep, creates an appeal system as well while giving animal refugee sites the right to humane due process. Even vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance weighed in. Let's watch.
So I know Don's fired up about Peanut the squirrel. We were on the way down here from Cincinnati. He was like, is it really the case that the Democrats murdered the Elon Musk of squirrels? And I said, yeah, it sounds like, have you seen the videos of this squirrel? He's a genius.
So this story, you're laughing already. It's a bit horrible thing that happened to this squirrel, and it was a pet for this person. It's not a wild squirrel. It was a
squirrel rescue.
Yes, it was a wild pet. It lived in the house. It had a heavy social media presence. The government came, took it away, and killed it. They killed the pet. Here's an example. You talk about the Haitian pet killing thing being wrong. Well, here's an example. Again, not done by immigrants, done by government officers in a Democratic-controlled state came and killed these people's pets. I think it's awful. This is exactly the kind of thing that fires up my libertarian anger at the state, at big government. Just leave people and their pets alone. Squirrel wasn't bothering anyone. Well, it didn't go bite some neighbor where then you have to have some intervention. It was just happy little squirrel doing its thing, getting photographed. Oh, it's behind me on screen right now. Oh, a poor little squirrel. I don't even like squirrels very much, and I was still moved by this.
As an animal rights activist, someone who doesn't eat meat, I sympathize, but I'm going to read you the DUC statement just so we have a little more context. A person involved with the investigation was bitten by the squirrel. To test for rabies, both animals were euthanized. The animals are being tested for rabies, and anyone who has been in contact with these animals is strongly encouraged to consult their physician. So I'm curious what's going on with the...
So they tried to abduct the squirrel, and the squirrel bit the abductor, the investigator, and then that was the pretext to kill it. This also does happen, by the way, to people's dogs. It's terrible. If the police come, knock down your door, sometimes a wrong door raid, and then they just shoot your dog, even the dog's not bothering as a threat to them at all. It's terrible.
I just find
Leave people's pets alone.
I find it wild that this is the direction the campaign's going in right now. It's like things are going so bad for Trump that they're complaining about everything, and they've made this an issue. Elon Musk.
They're not going bad for Trump. B, it's an issue because they're saying they wouldn't do this, and some people want to vote for who's not going to kill their pets.
Maybe. I would like to vote for the person who doesn't allow the police to bust into somebody's home, a person of color's home, and shoot them, like Breonna Taylor, for instance, and thank God that's being...
Of course, nobody thinks
I know you do.
That's
good.
Republican Senator Rand Paul sponsored the legislation to make those kinds of raids illegal. It has nothing to do with race or anything. It should just be illegal to do that kind of thing. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Breonna Taylor was victim, similarly, of much worse to do this to a person, but it's still bad to barge into people's homes and destroy or take their property and shoot or kill them or their pets. Very bad.
One more thing.
People don't want this.
People don't want it. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, even though I'm not pro taking squirrels from anybody's home. They also might be worried that this social media presence was basically influencing others to go out there and grab any other animals out and bring them in. And this isn't. Remember Friends and the monkey that was on Friends and how it was illegal to have a monkey. I forgot the monkey's name. Do you remember?
Well, it's Ross's monkey.
Ross's monkey.
I don't remember the monkey's name.
But that was a big issue, and that there's every 2 or 3 years in New York City, there's some sort of hullabaloo, whatever, over someone who has an animal that they pulled from the streets. The owl died. That wasn't killed, but the owl.
The New York owl.
Yeah, what was his name?
No, he was released into the wild, and he's thriving. He's doing well. Say it again?
Flacco.
Flacco's out there living his best life.
No, he died. Oh my God.
Oh, he died?
He ran.
I thought Flacco was doing fine.
Flacco had all, when they did the investigation, he had the autopsy, he had all these chemicals in his system and things that he was eating off the streets of New York, and he rammed into a window just like so many other birds do. Although I do have a bird infestation on my balcony still. It has been 2 years. Literally 40 birds live on my balcony, and I am trying to get the city to do something other than put spikes up. I don't know what it would be. I don't want to kill them. I just want them to find a new home, even though I'm in their home.
My scary squirrel-related story. Are you ready for this? When I was in college, I was running in the park, University of Michigan, and a squirrel came across my path and ran up me, up my leg.
It's like having a rat run
up
you
my
on the
leg,
subway.
leapt off right here. And this is a trauma that I have never recovered from.
And
so I don't care for squirrels at all.
You're still defending Peanut after that.
Scary little legs running. Ugh. And squirrel people, it's just not. It's not for me. But I don't yuck your yum. I don't judge other people for their choices or proclivities. If you have a pet squirrel that you love, good for you. And a lot of people like the squirrel. And this is terrible. What has happened?
I'm anti-pigeons. That's where I am right now.
Pigeons are gross.
It's also just public service notice. The pigeon droppings are very toxic, and if you have asthma, it can actually kill you. So I can't open my balcony because my balcony is encrusted with it's gross. And so they have to go and clean it all the time, and they haven't been able to figure out how to get them off. It started with 2 that were in love, and I thought it was really cute when there were 2 little lovebirds, and then I didn't realize one was pregnant, and then all of the neighborhood pigeons came to my balcony, and I am the world's headquarters for pigeons.
You're sponsoring a pigeon orgy. This is no good.
And people come over and they're like, "What is going on your balcony?" And I have to close the. It's a lot.
There's been so many memes, AI-generated content about the squirrel Peanut. It's reminiscent a little bit of Harambe. Oh, yeah. Remember when they shot Harambe again? Not Harambe's fault. The gorilla killed at the zoo. I can't remember. Was it Boston Zoo? Somewhere in the.
I can't remember. It was
exactly
like 10
where it
years
was.
ago now.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. And then because a kid, dumb kid, wandered in, deliberately went in, and then they shoot you. It's not the animal, wasn't the animal's fault. The animal didn't do something wrong. They kill the animal. It was wrongful, but now Harambe's up there looking down upon us, just all those memes, Harambe, and now with AI, we can get a lot more of that content. So I'm just seeing, ducks and cats and Harambes, and now Peanut the squirrel joins that class.
This little heavenly group of animals.
I will remember you.
We're gonna get cited now. You can't sing that.
Oh, really? Can I? Oh.
Just finish the sentence with another.
And moving on, that does it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. So we're having so much fun. We will be back tomorrow for a full day of election coverage. It's finally here. Here we go, Joker meme. And we're available, of course, anywhere you can get your podcast fix. And I will see you back here tomorrow. Take care.